Hi, this is Bob Samuels from Tech Connector. One of my favorite parts of my job is to be able to learn and share best practices. And I have a great group of marketers that I've assembled today, and we're going to talk about the importance of optimizing the relationship between marketers and their agents. And we'll go ahead and introduce ourselves. So I'm Bob Samuels. I've been in the B2B lead gen business about 20 some odd years, co-founded Tech Connector about 5 years ago. We are a quality assurance platform for B2B lead gen. And one of my favorite, a short fun fact about me, I'm really enjoying pickleball. That's my big life today. And the bigger issue is my new grandson. So I'm a new grandfather too. So those are my fun facts. So Sean, if you want to introduce yourself.
I'm excited to see videos of you playing pickleball. That's my own personal fun fact. Hi, I'm Sean Markin. I'm a marketer. I've been a marketer for over 20 years. I've worked on the client side and the agency side. Social entrepreneur. I founded a public school. Education is near and dear to my heart. Fun fact about me is I've never tried pickleball, but I think it's actually the fastest growing sport in America, which I found out through one of my client relationships. And I'm actually pretty fascinated to play it because I used to play tennis when I was younger, and pickleball seems like it's either a more intense or a less intense version.
You'll pick it up fast, and it's a nice learning curve, and it's a lot more laughs and fun per shot, I think, than any other sport.
I could see that. And I'm excited to talk to Melanie. Melanie and I had the pleasure of doing one of these before. Jessica, I get to meet, and everyone seems wonderful. So I'm really excited to chat with everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. And Melanie?
Hi, I'm Melanie Kennedy. I am a founder and media consultant for my company, Strategic Media. And I have been running this company since 2004. We became an LLC, so almost 20 years now. I've been doing media for over 30 years, and I love it. I still love it after all this.
You were 12.
What's that?
Since you were 12.
Well, I wish. Thank you, Bob. And I'm really excited to be here. I really appreciate you including me, Bob. My fun fact, and also Sean, it's great to see you again, always, and Jessica. My fun fact, which I guess it was fun at the time, it was interesting. Years ago, I was a fitness instructor and personal trainer, and then started getting more and more into the marketing space. And I also, my other fun fact is I started out as a journalism major, so I used to want to be a reporter. Never quite happened. And really happy to be here and talk about agency client relationships.
Excellent. Thank you, Melanie. Jessica?
Hi, I'm Jessica. I've been in B2B marketing for probably about 10, 12 years or so now. So compared to you guys, not quite as long, but I specialize in developer marketing and ABM and digital strategies around that. And I've worked in cloud security and Kubernetes shops. I'm currently working for an observability platform at Honeycomb, which I'm very much enjoying. And a fun fact about me, actually, I have two. Melanie, I was also a journalism major. And Bob and Sean, I live about 10 minutes away from Bainbridge Island, where pickleball was invented.
I mean, this is all about pickleball today.
Little subtopic. Excellent. Thank you all for having. So, I'll start off the questions with one, and then Sean, I'll let you take over. But
sure.
Jessica, what are when you're deciding whether you want to hire an agency, what are your considerations? And Melanie, when you're considering accepting a relationship with a client, what are you most interested in? Jessica, you can start first, I guess.
Sure. I've been working at startups for a while now, and one of the things that I've noticed about agencies lately is they tend to, at least smaller ones, are specializing. So I'm looking for agencies that are very, very specialized in B2B, in SaaS, in tech, and I'm looking at their client roster to see companies that are similar to mine. I'm not as impressed by massively sized companies or like public companies. I'm looking for ones that are similar to mine, because I find that if I go with an agency that has these huge brand logos, my budget's not going to matter to them. I'm not going to get the attention that I need, especially as a startup. So those are kind of my initial parameters when looking.
Thanks, makes sense.
Great. And so for strategic media, when we look for clients, we try to find clients that are a good fit, both in terms of our experience and background, and also culturally. We're not overly picky, but if it's a category where we don't feel that we have enough experience in, then we would probably not accept the relationship.
I think what I find fascinating, Jessica, I want to sort of start with you is, you know, I have worked for those big, you know, those big agencies, and I've worked for smaller ones. And one of the things that I've always been impressed about by Melanie when we've talked is how laser focused she is, and how impressive her sort of ability to sort of dive in. How do you know, and in my experience, the larger agencies, they provide like big, broad solutions, right? It's like, here's this huge opportunity and we're gonna like do this and that. How do you, when you're looking, are you putting out RFPs, or are you saying, well, I know I need this expansion? Because that to me is what the agency is about. It's about scaling your expertise. And so when you think to yourself, what do you like, how do you actually select that? How do you go about either knowing you need someone? Do you put out RFPs? Do you start searching on your own?
Yeah, definitely. I think that the search tends to start with help with paid search. Honestly, I feel like that can be a full-time job in and of itself. I do an RFP process, and when it comes to interviewing, I'm trying to figure out, I'm trying to gauge whether or not they're speaking my language. It's a very specific way of talking about marketing. You know, if they're asking me about impressions, if they're asking me about placements and things like that, it's a good place to start. If they're asking me where my pain points around SQL conversions are, if they're asking what my pipeline looks like, that's when I know that they know what my pain points are. They know what I'm going through, they know what my struggles are going to be. And if they come back with you know, a proposed solution around that makes sense to me, not necessarily that I've come up with, because that's why I'm looking for an agency, is for that expertise to kind of help us scale. But yeah, I'm really looking for someone that's understanding what I'm talking about and can speak it back to me.
Yeah. And so when you're getting a pitch from them, is there something that, because I'll tell you my red flags when I get a pitch, but I don't want to influence the answer. But are there red flags, or are there things that are super green lights for you when you're reviewing a pitch?
I would say if they're familiar with publishers that are going to be applicable to my brand, if they're familiar with solutions that are actually going to convert, like if I get a pitch that's just like, yeah, you should spend a ton of money on Twitter. Have you been on Instagram? Do you guys do TikTok? I'll know immediately that it's probably not going to be a good fit for us, and that they haven't done the research into the kind of people we're trying to reach.
Yeah, my red flag has always been, is this person talking about revenue generation, or are they talking about pie in the sky big idea? And that's, and I, you know, obviously pie in the sky big ideas are amazing. You're like, sure, but everybody's got them. And I need you to tie that back to some revenue. And Melanie, I suspect you do an excellent job of this. How do your pitches go when you're sort of crafting them? And how much do you think agencies, for example, should reveal in that pitch?
I think there's a fine line. I think in terms of how we approach it, we try to gather as much information from the RFP as possible. We draw upon other clients that, categories, I should say, that we are familiar with, such as if it's an industry where we've bought media in, and we use whatever expertise we can. We look at competitive research to see where they are in their segment. We look at a lot of the published Gartner and Forrester reports, help us identify from a B2B perspective where a solution is in relation to their primary competitors in the space. And then in terms of what we like to focus on in the pitch itself, we don't like to give away our trade secrets, obviously, but we do want to give a little bit of a flavor of how we think through a project, how we think through a new business client, identifying the objectives and the strategies, but getting down to the tactics and the negotiations. That's not, we never talk about rates, for instance, in the proposal, because really really not there yet to talk about costs until we are ready to get into the market and negotiate and see kind of what's available.
That's interesting. So Jessica, that seems like a little bit, are you off put by that, or is that just the right amount of information as a being on the client side?
It's a good amount of information. I think that one thing that I tend to do, and that I think a lot of startups probably do, or people in my position, is come at agencies very last minute with an urgent request and need things like a proposal, or at least a rough draft of proposal and pricing immediately, because all of a sudden the CMO has said, good news, we have budget for help, and I need you to present options in 3 days, kind of thing. And so I'm hitting the phones and saying, listen, just tell me if you can do this and tell me if I can afford it. I don't have time. Like, can you do this for me? So I wouldn't say it's frustrating or anything like that, but I will say I can definitely be that annoying person where I need that like third phone call information in like the first email.
Yeah, and I think that's where something like Melanie's deep experience really can come in, because I'm sure, Melanie, this has been your experience. This can't be the first time someone said to you, like, I need this in 3 days. I'm sure that's, how do you handle that and still maintain like the level of quality that you do?
Well, thank you for that, Sean. I try to give enough information based on the expertise that our team has, not just myself, but our team has in buying in different channels. So for instance, if a client comes to me and comes to us and says that they want to, buy a pie in the sky media plan, but they have this size budget, I'm going to be honest with them. If you want to generate awareness, for instance, and the audience that you're going after is, pretty large, the universe, then I would be honest that I don't know that your funds are going to, do what you want them to do. And it's a waste of money if you just jump in there and buy something that's not going to meet your objectives. So I'm pretty honest about that. Like I said, I don't feel comfortable giving like cost per lead rates or CPMs or what have you. But in general, I can give an idea of, well, you could probably afford, this media mix, the details to be worked out later, obviously.
Sure. So let's dream big for a minute, Melanie. What would be your ideal brief? What would you love to hear from, if I'm on the client side and I'm just like, I want to get an A+, like I want to get the 5 gold stars from the teacher. What kind of brief would you love to get from me as an agency?
Well, we'll make it really easy on you, Sean. We will give you our brief template and you will be able to fill out everything. And we are actually kind of sticklers when we do, obviously, after we have a new piece of business or a continued piece of business, we're pretty adamant about wanting to have the brief filled out as much as possible. We also work with clients to help them fill out the brief. They may need some guidance on, what types of audiences they want to target, what tactics we might look into. So yeah, definitely we'll give you a template. and what types of things? Yes, go ahead, sorry.
And how does that match with, you, Jessica, when you're putting out an RFP and they have a template? How do you merge the two? Is that something that you have experience with, or how do those collide essentially? Because one person's saying, I need this information. The other person's saying, I got this information to give you ahead of time. How do you merge those?
Well, if I needed information in 3 days, I wouldn't make them fill out a brief. I would give them like the core points that need to be involved in the plan. But in general, I don't mind filling out a form. I feel like the more information the agency has about what my needs are, the better, like the more we're both going to succeed. So I have no qualms about doing additional work there.
And that seems though to come down to a question of like trust, right? Because you have to trust that that agency is good enough for you to invest your time in, because presumably if you're talking to 26 agencies and they're all like, fill out my form, you're going to be like, okay, well, I've got a job to do. What is your, how do you balance that? How do you actually like sort of whittle down and narrow down the agencies that you work with, or at least are considering?
So before filling out a brief and putting in the work, because like you said, that is a massive, massive amount of time that you want to put into it. I always have like an intro call, and I can tell very quickly by the kinds of questions that the agency is asking. They don't have to give away trade secrets, and they don't have to be specific about the solutions that they'll recommend or tend to recommend for clients like me. I know that if they're asking me who I've run with, what the phone calls for the SDRs are like as a result of the leads that I got from that publisher, that campaign, I know that from that question, they're going to be able to come up with something that's going to fill my needs or meet my needs. So those are the people, or those are the agencies I don't mind putting in the work for.
And that then is a question for me for Melanie. Do you ask your client or your prospective clients about their budget, and is that an uncomfortable conversation for them, or how do you approach that? Do you avoid it until later, or do you sort of ask it up front? And if you do, how do you approach that?
Well, budget's always a very touchy subject, and I definitely don't lead with that. What I'd like to understand is what a range of budget would be, and what that budget needs to do. Like, what are their objectives and goals? What do they need to show to their management in terms of a successful campaign, a successful KPIs have been met, so on and so forth. So what I like to do is ask for a range, and if a range can't be provided, I like to offer the ability to help the clients come to a budget that would be not only digestible for their company, but also that will help meet their objectives. So we do what's like a task-based model based on what do they need to get, whether it's like, these are my conversion rates to get to my MQLs or my opportunities or my pipeline. May not be able to get conversion rates from the client. If we can, I like to build a back of the envelope model to say, well, if you really need to reach this audience and you need to generate this number of MQLs, how are we going to get you there? And I always cushion it, because you never know until you get in the market how your content is going to perform, and a lot of different factors.
I'm a crazy client though. Like, let me put that right out there. I'm absolutely insane. And I want everything for nothing. So how do you sort of tone down my crazy and bring me back a little bit closer to the launch pad so that you can actually help me? What does the conversation like that look like?
Well, first I knock you over the head. No, I'm kidding.
I deserve it I deserve it. So
No.
good start. We're starting well.
No, I'm just honest. I mean, I don't like to say that your budget is not going to do what you want it to do until I get in the market and test. But I do try to bring realistic expectations to clients. So we try to make sure that we don't overpromise if possible and underdeliver. And at the same time, we try not to underpromise so that, we can give, we don't just want to shine every time. We want to try to give them as much as the projections that we build. We want to make them as realistic as possible based on what we've seen to date, based on what they have in their database in terms of, like I said, conversion rates and estimations and other campaigns they've tested, keeping in mind that testing conversion rates for internal emails, for instance, to customers is not going to drive the same results as external email marketing to a brand new audience.
Yeah. And so Jessica, that sort of, I'll turn it back to you, is how do you want to hear about your budgets maybe a little too small, or maybe you need to think about going back to the CMO and asking for more budget as CFO or whomever opens that up for you. How's that best positioned for you?
As soon as possible. So I am blatantly honest from the get-go with like potential partners. I'll say, this is my budget. I'm short 10 SQLs a month. This is where I need to grow into. Can we talk about the solutions that you're offering that could potentially help me get there? Because I don't, I don't necessarily know everything that that you're offering. So just kind of go through your suite of expertise and see what you think is going to move the needle there. And if you come back and tell me, like, especially if you can show me a model, if you can show me the math and say, listen, like, based on the conversion rates that your company is seeing so far, which I happily share, that budget is not going to help you get to that at 10 SQL goal per month. Let's talk about, how we can start small and scale up if we're able to prove concept. That's something that's huge for me too. I live in startup land, and I can say, starting out, I've got $50,000 to help me scale up to where I need to be or where the company needs to be. If we're able to show success and that we're on the right track, there's always more budget. I can make the case for it. I know how to argue. I know how to get that internal buy-in if we're able to show success. So my hope is always to grow with an agency and to expand the relationship, but I'm almost never going to come up with an amazing, huge budget initially to accomplish my goals. And I know that.
So you selected Melanie because she's clearly the best front leader. Talk to me about how you prefer to structure a relationship, because we have some agencies that act as sort of an extension of the marketing team. We have some that where, you sort of throw it over the fence and they throw stuff back to you. How do you want to structure that relationship on the client side?
For me specifically, I want them to be an extension of my team, because the company size that I tend to go for, where I feel comfortable, tends to be a flatter org. So I normally don't have 5 or 6 marketers underneath me. It's, maybe 1, maybe 2, maybe 0. And I'm really depending on that agency to help me accomplish my goals. So ideally, I can get a hold of them via Slack, respectfully, not overwhelming them. It's great if they can integrate with whatever our project management software is. If it's Asana, Basecamp, whatever, that's fantastic. I am really bad at checking my email, and I'm very upfront about that. So if they can kind of try to cater to my communication style, that's really helpful. But I'll give them any information that they think they're going to need to help me reach my goals. I will give them access to my Salesforce. I'll give them access to my Google Analytics. I want them to be able to see everything that I'm seeing so that they can make strategic decisions as if they were in my position.
That's great. And what is the cadence of sharing documents, and what kind of meetings? How do you structure them? Do you bring them into your meetings? Do you have separate meetings that you organize with them? How does that work?
I try not to bring them into meetings unless I think it's absolutely crucial, because that's part of my job, is being that conduit between, our company and the agency. And, a lot of times people internally are going to say things or have, like you said, pie in the sky wishes that I know are not going to happen, or I know are not realistic. And I don't want that to cloud the agency's judgment of us as a company. I don't want them to stress out about those things. I want to make sure that the end result and the end ask from the agency is coming directly from me. So I don't want to muddy the waters with other people.
Sure. And so, Melanie, what is your ideal? You've heard sort of Jessica's. From your perspective, what's your ideal sort of relationship? What kind of information do you like to receive? What kind of, integration do you like to have?
I think I would ditto what Jessica is saying here. I think that it's ideal if we could at least receive some level of data inputs in terms of how campaigns are performing, as far as revealing some of the specifics. We're fine with not getting as detailed information, but we prefer wherever we can get actual numbers from Salesforce. We don't necessarily need to log in to Salesforce, but if we can get those reports, that's great, or whatever the attribution platform is that's measuring the campaigns. We actually like to even help clients with that, help do pivots, help organize the data for them. And we do that in many cases. And then we put together insights and recommendations. Yeah. As far as meetings, I agree. We don't really need to be involved in the higher level management meetings with the client, but if we're invited to, we're more than happy to. In fact, we've even been on calls with sales BDRs and just kind of like helping align the campaigns to the nurture. And basically, yeah, wherever we can be involved and be a extension of the client's marketing team is beautiful. We love it.
And to that end, I think at the core of an agency client relationship is this, what I call decision cycle, where the agency is making decisions in some ways on behalf of the client. You're going off and buying media, you're just, or so other agencies are doing partnerships, designing something. And so that has to be on brand, that has to, Jessica has to approve that. How does that decision cycle work with you? Is it tightly integrated? Is it they give you enough and you can go off on your own and then you sort of report back with results? What's your ideal sort of like decision loop?
Well, I think it's nice to have check-ins, milestone check-ins, just to ensure that we are on the right track. We get full sign-off of a strategy and a plan and preliminary tactical considerations before we actually go into the market and do the buys. So wherever we can kind of get on the same page, and where the changes happen before we actually are, rolling up our sleeves and doing the actual negotiations, we're on the same page.
And Jessica, how do you like to manage that? How do you like to be that conduit? How hands-on do you want to be?
Kind of somewhere in the middle, probably. There's a lot of decisions that I depend on the agency to make for me and on my behalf. And I'm, once we've done all the work to onboard and we've established that trust, I'm fully comfortable with that. When it comes to branching out into new channels or testing out a new publisher, obviously I want to be in the loop on that. But I usually like when the agency has a blend of things that they've tried before with other clients that has worked really, really well, and give me kind of like a mini case study on why they think it would be a good fit for me. And then pairing that with innovation and showing me like, we've never run with these guys before, but we've done research on them. We think X, Y, and Z. This is why they'd be a good match for you and your company. Do you want to test it? And then that gives me the opportunity to be, kind of innovative through them when I don't have time in my day-to-day anymore, which is really important to me.
Yeah. I think from my perspective, when I'm on the client side, the biggest question I want answered is always why. Why did you do this? Why did you make this decision? Because I want to make sure, I think if someone knows the why, they can generally get to the what and the how. But I want them to, stealing that from Simon Sinek, I want to know why they're doing that decision. And if it was sort of an aggressive, action-oriented sort of buy, I'm cool with it, as long as it sort of wasn't a boneheaded sort of follow through. But that sort of leads to another question, which is, how do you like to give client feedback when you're telling an agency, hey, this is not working, or hey, this is working really well, we should do more? How do you set that cadence? Is it just during your feedback meetings? Are there times where you'll interrupt the process?
Yeah, milestone check-ins for sure. I like there to be an active feedback loop at all times if I can. And honestly, that's something that I'm hoping the agency comes at me with as well. I feel like, if there's a massive dip in traffic for some reason, if, phone calls aren't going well, if the leads are being kicked back by the SDR team, it's something that, I definitely will bring up and try to work through with the agency. And I would hope that they're seeing that on their end too, with all of the reporting that I'm sharing with them and all of the things that I've given them access to. And then more, case by case information and feedback I love to give is, I work so closely with SDRs. It's one of my favorite relationships that I have. And I'm that annoying marketer that's like, hey, I gave you, 50 MQAs last week, and I've noticed that you haven't called this guy, and this guy. Can we talk about why? And then when I get that feedback, like that live feedback from them, like, well, I called them and this and this happened. That's the kind of feedback that I feel is my role to pass on to the agency so that they can take that back and optimize.
Yeah. And Melanie, how do you like to receive feedback? What is because clearly we talked about it, both you and Jessica liking the meetings, but how do you talk to me about like the SDR feedback is that something you'd want to receive? What kind of feedback do you like to receive, and how frequently?
Well, we like to receive feedback as much as possible and as much as comfortable for the client. We do have periodic meetings. Usually we do either weekly status or bi-weekly status, depending on the nature of the campaign. Sometimes we'll start off with more frequent meetings and feedback at the beginning. And then, as Jessica mentioned, as we get a relationship going with the client and we know a little bit more, understand where their expectations are, what they're hoping to get out of their programs, then it's more like we like to try to have the authority to make optimizations on the campaign using our own, strategy and knowledge. I think it also depends on the platform. If it's, for instance, a social media platform or paid search, Google AdWords, we like to have the authority to make optimizations kind of on the fly. Also, using the actual platform algorithms. But when it comes to introducing a new publisher to the plan, or even switching out the out-of-home mix, which happens a lot, we like to, be very candid with the client and give them the pros and cons. And then we'll almost always, I'm kind of a stickler about, where possible, providing a recommendation so that the client gets what they're paying for. They're getting the strategy and the expertise. But then, as you mentioned, the why, the rationale. So it's a recommendation and a rationale, but also giving the pros and cons and the trade-offs. In fact, a lot of our programs, we try to do multiple options, especially if the budget is finite. So they know if they want to, try different things, this is a trade-off of what they're going to get for a different media mix, for instance.
And that's really interesting, because I think it speaks to how you share data back and forth. And so for me, part of that, it sounds like you're sharing your best practices. Like, here's the why we're doing it, here's the rationale. How much of your job do you see as educating your clients about, so that either they are open to your decisions, or just because that's sort of part of your nature? I feel like you're a natural born educator. You might have been a fitness coach, but it sounds like you're actually also an educator too. So how much of that sort of teaching the client do you do, or is part of what you see as your job?
I think it varies based on the level of understanding of the from the client. I'm always welcome to just get on the phone and talk about strategy, brainstorm ideas, even if they're completely, unaffordable or what have you. But I do believe that education is important. I also try to get signals from the client when they do want a little bit more hand holding, or when they just, really believe in what we're doing and they already have experience with it. For instance, I probably won't need to share as much education, but the more the better. Yeah, we love being a partner with the client. And it's not about, okay, we're telling you to do this and you're doing this. It's more about, let's do what we think is going to be the best for the client. The client's always right. The client's always knows what they want, but we also have expertise to provide guidance.
Well, I've been a client and I'm definitely not always right, but
I was going to say,
I do appreciate
Well,
being told that.
Let me caveat that. When I say the client's always right, what I mean is everything that we do is in the client's best interest. Everything that the agency does, not even just that, but the agency as an entity, should be, in my mind, for a client, for the client's best interest, whatever that is, not necessarily what they want, because like I said, they might need some guidance that maybe what they want is not right in our experience.
For sure. So Jessica, tell me, I know when I've been on the client side, I have tried to, and maybe this is just me being a weirdo and trying to brain dump everybody, but how much are you picking the brains of your agencies to sort of learn what they're doing and learn basically what makes them the experts that they are?
so much, and not in like a competitive weird way. I genuinely want to learn, and the great thing about agencies is they have time. I mean, part of their job is to stay up to date with best practices and what has changed in the last 12 minutes with Google and things that I am just not able to keep up with my job. And so every now and then, yeah, and especially I would say during the discovery and onboarding process, in a past life, I spent all day long in Google Ads, and I was optimizing and switching creative out, switching everything out. It's definitely a full-time job to manage, sometimes many full-time jobs. And so just learning what's new, a couple of years ago when they changed over responsive ads or canceled text ads and made it so that they were only responsive, that blew my mind. And I didn't understand why they were telling, or why the agency was telling me, like, you have to come up with headlines, or we have to come up with headlines that will work in any order. I was like, that's silly. I want my ad to say this. And they're like, yeah, it's not going to happen. It's not going to work that way. And so it helps me do my job better when I'm in the loop on things like that. So when things happen and innovation is happening out there and I can't be in the loop with it, then I love doing that with agencies.
I think you touched on something that I think is really interesting. In the beginning of the relationship, you're having to share a lot of information. How do you protect your data privacy? How do you, like, are there things that you don't share, or do you just sort of say, well, we've got an NDA and, like, I'm going to share basically everything? Is there stuff that you have that you sort of build walls around and act as the interface for?
I definitely always have an NDA signed and filed away for protection. That's probably the first thing I do after I get off a call with them and I decide that I want to move forward and head into that RFP process. I don't think I have too many walls, to be honest. I mean, I would obviously be very careful about, like, funding announcements and things that are proprietary. I wouldn't necessarily share that. And those are things that, if we were a bigger company, maybe I wouldn't even really need to be in the loop on. But because I work at small companies and small startups, it's just, everybody needs to know everything all the time. I probably wouldn't share things like that. But as it relates to the business and the bottom line and what I hired that agency for, I don't really have any walls that I build up.
That's interesting. Melanie, I have a question for you. So I used to work for an agency that had two, and I won't name their names. We all know these brands, but they were like dog eat dog competitors. They were like viciously against each other. And we had the agency represented both of them. I'm wondering how you, and one of them is notorious for its secrecy, like NSA level, like notorious for their secrecy. I'm wondering how you protect sort of, I don't know if that's ever happened to you. I'm wondering how you protect sort of that division between your clients.
Well, I think first of all, before we take on a client, we ensure there's no competitive conflicts with the clients that we are already working with. In categories where they're not competitive, but they maybe go after the same audience or the similar type of product that's, partnered with one another, but not direct competitors. I think the most important thing to us is client confidentiality. By signing that NDA, we're not going to share any information ever from one client to the other, not even on a phone call, not even the most that we would do is, yes, we've piloted these websites or publishers or channels in this category, and we kind of know what works. We kind of know what content resonates. Where possible, we provide that guidance based on the many hundreds of campaigns we've run in a variety of categories. So definitely, that's a super important area that we're very cognizant about, and we wouldn't share any competitor data at all.
Love it. So I want to pivot a little bit. Since we're in the Valley, we should pivot. And also, since we're in the Valley, and this is a marketing podcast in 2023, we can't avoid talking about artificial intelligence. It is changing literally everything. And if you want a 9-hour podcast, just ask me one question and I will pontificate ad nauseum. Melanie, I want to ask you, how is it changing what you are doing, and how do you anticipate that it will change what you're going to do in the future?
Sure. I think, well, AI has been around for a while in terms of targeting priorities, in terms of account-based marketing and prioritizing your accounts based on their activities. The AI overlay, of course, brings the machine more into the actual equation, as opposed to sort of the machine and the human. So quite frankly, I'm a little bit concerned about it, because I don't want to take away from the human experience in business and marketing and media and everything. I do think it's very cool. I've gotten on and played around with it, not for business, but more like for personal stuff. And it's fun. It's really fun. But even like with authors, I've heard that they've been using ChatGPT to help craft certain stories or titles of their novel, or whatever different creative ideas. But I think going in terms of how it's going to affect the business overall going in the future, I think it's going to become more and more, it's going to drive more and more machine learning in terms of decisions and the platforms that we are marketing, that we're using for the media. Obviously Google and Facebook are already using it to a certain extent, and I think it's to become more and more, and it is a little bit scary, but I also think it's kind of cool.
I think the one thing that you have that AI won't ever have is a ability to build strong relationships with humans. So I think you specifically are safe. But Jessica, what is your what has been your sort of experience? How has it changed what you're doing on the client side? And how do you envision it changing your work in general?
I see AI, specifically, I think ChatGPT right now, because that's so huge. I see it as a head start. Blank pages tend to stress me out to no end. And so if just the other day, I knew that I wanted a blog to be written that I could drive a specific audience to. And I knew roughly what I wanted it to be called. I kind of knew the gist of what I wanted it to be about, but I knew that it would be developed much, much faster, and I get the final product faster if I could submit an outline. And so I said, here's the title, here's what I want it to be about, here's who I want it to target, just spit me out an outline. And it wasn't perfect, but it gave me a place to start. And instead of starting from scratch and trying to build it out, I was editing, and I can edit all day. I know immediately what's wrong and I can fix it before I send it off. And the same actually goes with reporting too. Like I can feed a report into it and say, give me some insights on this. Like, what is all this data telling me? And I'll know, I don't care about that. That's not important. That's also not true given the context of our company and blah, blah, blah. But again, it gives me a jumping off point so that I'm not starting from scratch, and it's not this looming project that I know that eventually I need to start, but it's going to take me hours and hours just to get the first part done. That part can be done quickly, and then I can get into the meat of whatever it is that I'm trying to accomplish.
It destroys the white paper paralysis.
Yes.
I have been there. I think probably everybody's been there. So that's how it's helping you now. And we're talking about a large language model, and there's obviously diffusion models when you talk about imagery and video. And I think every day a new artificially intelligent system comes online to help marketers do their job better and more effectively. Where do you think the future is for you, and what you're doing?
One of the things, especially with sales enablement, that we try to work on, or people in my position try to work on, are competitive insights and alerts. And that comes from, stalking social media channels. It comes from stalking blogs. It comes from Crunchbase, like all kinds of different outlets to try to gather this information to toss over to sales to say, you know what, like X competitor released blah, blah, blah last week, and they're talking about that this week, and all this stuff. I tried to automate that. I tried to use AI to do that. And they're like, I think it was like, I'm really sorry. I only have information up to September of 2021. And I was like, okay, sucks for today, but someday this is like, it's just a matter of time.
So so we're talking about Chat GPT, but GPT-4 is actually sort of the more advanced model, and then they're releasing GPT-5, which we're not sure how far that will go up. However,
Yeah.
if you get GPT-4 and you buy the service, now there are add-ons that actually allow you to search the web, and there are other competitors to OpenAI's models. Open Assistant is one that was developed by a community of AI researchers, and that's up to date on the internet. So you have the benefits of having everything that's sort of like being piled into the internet around, and it doesn't have the resources of Microsoft backing it, but you also have, like, the open source component of it being a part of it. So it's going to be an interesting future. What other changes do you think are impacting your industry and sort of B2B in general beyond sort of artificial intelligence?
One really interesting thing that I've seen come up more and more lately is a difference in pricing model when it comes to partners. So I've had this happen several times now where they'll tell me the rate of what it's going to cost to run with them. And then they'll tell me, we also see that you just had a funding round. If you give us rights to invest $300,000 after a 1-month evaluation, we'll knock that fee down to whatever. And I've seen it happen twice now in the last, I want to say 2 months or so, and I had never seen it before that. And it could just be me, never having experienced it as a fluke, but I could totally see that scaling, especially for startups, obviously, who are not public companies. I thought it was really interesting because, just like most startups have an equity component to their compensation, it makes sense that that would extend to partners. So especially ones that are helping us drive business.
That's interesting. So new business models on the agency side. It's been a tough year for venture capitalists to raise funding. So I think it's interesting because more startups might be open to that because they're having a harder time sort of raising all of the funding they need. And if you can take out some of the costs, that might be attractive to some. Melanie, what are you seeing in your industry that's changing? Forget AI for a second, or I think that's sort of impossible at this point, but in addition to AI, what are you seeing that's changing your landscape?
I think just in general, I think there are a lot more options out there, because I think also based on the technological improvements in targeting and in audience sizing and all the different tools available, a lot more knowledge, a lot more information is definitely driving a lot of our decisions, our media decisions. But I still think, as you mentioned, that the human element is there, the human experience of what has worked in the past, kind of that sort of background, that knowledge. But I think, yeah, in addition to more information and more choices, which makes our job more interesting, I think also the way that companies, which is, the topic here, is the way that companies are working with agencies. They are becoming more like partners. I love when clients like Jessica, say, yes, we like working with smaller companies because we know we're not going to be a small fish in a big pond. We're going to be an important client, and that relationship, I think, is super key, super important. And I think that's going to continue to be the case, particularly as, budgets are shrinking and as companies are looking to, be more efficient and more and deliver more against their bottom line. And then from a publisher perspective, I would say, and I'm not quite sure, Jessica, if you were talking about the publisher rates. I think you were more talking about, partnerships. But in terms of the publisher rates, because we talk to publishers all day long, every day, I think that we're finding that there's room for negotiation in some industries. I don't like when publishers provide a very large minimums, because I think it's not fair to the clients to have to spend, 6 figures to try out their brand. But that said, that's just, they have the ability to do that, and more power to them. But that is kind of like a stickler to me. It's like, I don't like these minimums. And yeah, there are some minimums that you have to place, and I get that because of the work that goes into it. But definitely they need to be within reason.
Yeah, I think you touched on something that was particularly interesting to me, and I think, Jessica, you sort of talked about this as well, as what is this sort of future of agencies? And what I have always been impressed by Melanie is that, like, there's this hyper focus. And so for me, if I'm a pet food, manufacturer, I want an agency that focuses on pet owners. They know pet owners. That's like that's their jam. If I'm a B2B, SaaS play, I want someone who knows how to do that to my specific audience. I think the future becomes expertise in audience. I think that the harbinger of that is actually ironically sort of B2C, because you look at, influencer marketing, and you look at sort of the power of, like, how much some idiot with a cell phone, how much power they can get by just being on TikTok or being on YouTube. And it's like that's super powerful. Like, and all of a sudden, like, if I'm an agency that has the ability to sort of target and knows that audience, knows what they're going to respond to in messaging, knows where they hang out, that is exactly what I want. And I think that becomes, and it's just hard to get that with like you said, the large public agencies, because they might, like, in general know, but like that level of specificity, the level of relationship, that's something that AI can't really compete with. And that's something that most other agencies, if I know moms between the age of 25 and 27, and I have an audience of that is a superpower for anyone looking for that specific audience. But I want to sort of reel it back and ask sort of a question about sort of the analytics tools you use, Melanie. Like, are there any recommendations? We have a question about recommendations for, how you do analytics and what tools you use to really sort of delve in.
Okay, sure. So the analytics are going to be aligned with the media mix and the objectives. A direct response campaign would use entirely different analytics than an awareness or brand campaign, or maybe a little bit of both. In terms of what analytics, I think looking at a third-party ad server and looking at working with the client, if they have an attribution platform that they can measure first, second touch in terms of B2B and lead generation, first, second touch attribution towards pipeline, where they can provide that data. We can use our own tools to analyze that data as well. I think a dashboard is key for clients that have the budget that can support it. Being able to access data as real time as possible, either through like a Google Data Studio, linking to their campaign manager accounts or our campaign manager accounts, either way. That helps identify kind of how things are trending and how we can use that data most readily on the fly to make optimizations.
You talked about third-party data, second-party data. Do you have providers that you think are particularly good, like specific people, or specific organizations that collect data in a way that you think is reliable?
Collect data? Well, I think, we've definitely worked with the Bomboras of the world. Definitely looking at like there's install base HD data. There's Dun & Bradstreet. There's a whole bunch of data segments in programmatic. Even, I could just name a ton, and we're using a lot of them in our campaigns as we speak, both in B2B and in B2C.
Jessica, you're a self-admitted stalker, both on social media apparently, and for your competitors need to watch out that you're hacking their computers. But that's a joke, obviously. You're not really I didn't just out you as a
Poor Jessica.
tech ops stalker. But
It's true. It's okay.
well, it's true, then it's true. Hire her for that. But what tools do you use when you're doing your competitive intelligence and your one? Are there any specific tools you're using?
I love intent tools. That's kind of a must-have for a certain size B2B company, I think, at this point. So something like ZoomInfo, Marketing OS, Demand-Based, 6sense, things like that. It's really easy. It plugs right into Salesforce in most cases. So it plugs right in and gives you highlights and insights there. That's a really, really easy way to do it if you can afford the tool to have that in your tech stack. That's a really easy way. In the old days, I would do Google Alerts. But yeah, I think that having my main source of truth in life is going to be Salesforce because I work so closely with sales and SDRs. So whenever I can stay in Salesforce and not drift off to another app, that's very, very helpful for me. And so tools that can integrate are always very helpful.
Next question. Do you have, so first of all, thank you for that. Now I can be equally good at stalking. Do you have a do you have a perspective on whether you're still outsourcing your projects or whether you're trying to bring more of your advertising and your marketing work in-house? Do you see a trend there? Is it sort of like situation agnostic, or what's your take there?
My take is it depends. It depends on a lot of things. Overall, I would say that what's important to me right now is to maintain kind of my role in integrated campaigns and making sure that everything is cohesive and connecting with what the organic team is doing, what PR is doing, what product marketing is telling me is important, what social media is doing, and making sure that we're all connected and that the messaging is clear across all of those channels. I think that's a massive pain point. It sounds easy. It's so not easy to do that and to maintain that level of communication. And so if I'm able to focus on that, I'm so happy to give optimizing bids in Google and finding publisher placements that are going to help get me to my bottom line. I'm happy to outsource that as long as the partner is someone I'm able to trust or an agency I'm able to trust.
Yeah. And Melanie, quick question for you as we sort of start to wrap up here. Is there so you've always sort of been in, since we met, you've always sort of been a superhero in my mind, just so you know. You sort of occupy like the pantheon of Marvel and DC, but you're better written than DC. Funnier than Marvel.
Big Sean.
How do you manage it all? So we have a question, basically, how would you advise a startup, someone who's starting an agency, to sort of manage their time when it comes to doing all the things from learning what's out there, research and development, implementing their strategy, outreach to clients, actually doing the work you've been hired to do? How do you do that and still have, time for family, time for assume fitness, probably training people on the side, probably running some iron triathlon marathon?
About that. So I think for me, it's about team and talent, and I try to find the best talent. And I truly believe that the right folks on your team, on your agency team, really make the difference. Having the right team members that have a balance in terms of the expertise, social media, programmatic, B2B, B2C, all of the above, analytics, planning, strategy. I think the team, that's how I manage it, is the team. We're all kind of in this together, even though it is my company. We are dedicated and we are loyal. And I feel like that is the biggest asset of an agency, is their talent and their team members and their culture. So that's kind of how I mean, I'm not saying I definitely work long hours. There's no question about it, but I love what I do. I think if I didn't love what I do, I would be out the door doing something else, teaching fitness or running triathlons or what have you.
There's two more questions that go back to one of the things that we sort of talked before. And there's a very specific question, and then I want to ask you the sort of a final question, and then Jessica, leave it with you, which is, do you feel comfortable asking for Google Analytics when you are formulating your pitch?
Yes, absolutely. You mean asking for data from the client?
Specifically like their Google Analytics to sort of say, this is how you're performing, and this is, I'm going to use that to then formulate a more effective pitch, I think.
Yes, absolutely. If we can get that data, absolutely. If it's a pitch, though, that's a good point. So if it's not an existing client, then I think if it's usually laid out in the RFP, this is what you're going to get.
Sure.
Go run with it and create your pitch. If there is an open-ended statement in that RFP, where it's open to questions, then we kind of really try to follow directions, because that's kind of important. And then if we can ask, do you have conversion rates that we can use, or do you have analytics that we can use to help guide our initial recommendations or strategy, for instance? So yeah, I would definitely ask. I mean, all I can do is say no. Happy to sign an NDA, but yeah, it's part of that partnership. It's that client agency partnership.
So my last question is there anything else you'd like to leave the audience with, or anyone who watches this on YouTube in the future, 2050, once AI has gotten us all, is there anything you'd like to leave us with?
I would say that don't be afraid to, break the boundaries, try new things, but test before you run with it. I think that's a really key.
Make sure you're not standing at the edge of the cliff.
Yeah, don't jump off the cliff too quickly if you're just getting into marketing and working with an agency, and use your agency wherever possible as your marketing arm, and collaboration with them.
Love it. Jessica, do you have any final thoughts for posterity?
Yeah, I would just say, do the work up front, do as much work as you can to find the perfect agency for you. I mean, nothing's going to be perfect, but the more work you do to establish that relationship, the easier your life is going to be down the road. It's so nice having an agency that is completely dependable and that will make you look good, all of it. So yeah, take your time, answer all of their questions. I've given access in RFPs to like my Google Ads account, and they can see what other agencies are in there during the RFP process. I have no problem with that. I think it's kind of fun. But yeah, just give them as much information as you can, because it's going to help them do a better job.
I don't know that anything would make me look good, but I do appreciate when I work with agencies. And I do want to thank you. Like, I think we should cut it here, but I do want to thank you so much for your time. It was such a pleasure to talk to you. Melanie, as always, superhero. Jessica, you're now part of the MCU. Welcome to the superhero universe, my own personal superhero universe.
Nice. Thank you.
Thank you guys.
Bob, for having us.
Good job. So Sean, any final words of wisdom from you?
That's an interesting question. I asked them. I don't respond to them.
You can think about it. And the one I picked up on from talking to Melanie and Jessica before is, the importance of trust, and just how key that is to establish it up front and all the way through. And you have the trust, you have the sharing, you have the feedback, you have the communication, and just so it's all a package that it's the only way it can work, or yeah, it seems to me.
I think I'm going to say something fairly unprofound, which is I think it's about to get really interesting. Like, I think the world's about to get really interesting. And I think the agencies and the clients that do well in this new world will be will have to be very smart and very savvy and understand the world that is around them in a way that maybe they didn't have to understand it before.
Beautiful. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for the audience. Thank you for lots of questions. That was great participation. Appreciated it. We'll make this on demand available upon request. Let us know if you want a recording. Let us know any feedback you have. Happy to learn from you as well. Thank you again, and have a nice day, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.